Last week, we talked about a completely wrecked economy, and I promised to be back this week to discuss the big bad R word. And I do have strategies for you today on how to navigate the real estate market if a recession does materialize. But first, let's talk about how Trump might have a secret plan to handle inflation. America's fighting a few wars right now. There's the war between the right and left. There is a war against misinformation. There is the war for free speech. Then there is the war we've talked about here quite often, the war on inflation. And it has been bloody. Despite the Fed jacking interest rates in a truly brutal fashion, prices have refused to come down. Why? Because Americans refused to stop spending. They blasted through their savings, then they maxed out their credit cards. Even after HELOCing their homes, they didn't stay out of the malls or airports. They just kept going. So producers never had to bring down the cost of any goods or services because the demand stayed high. Then Trump returned to the White House and blew up financial markets. Did he do it on purpose? His supporters always say yes, he does everything on purpose. But even they have been a bit freaked out over the past few weeks. The sentiment appears to be that this will either be a complete disaster or some kind of miracle will materialize as a result, but we have no choice but to wait and see because we fucked around and now we have to find out. Let's lean all the way in to that strategy then. The jobs report has had its fair share of drama over the past year, but long story short, it's given the Fed the confidence they need to continue to tackle inflation. If the labor market perseveres, even as they jack interest rates, then the war on inflation continues and must be fought. Job growth has continued month after month. Trump can't technically go into the private sector and make major companies lay people off. He can do it in the government, though. Is this why Dodge came into play? As you know, they've laid off 30,000 federal employees so far. Without jobs, these people might just stop spending. It's important to note that this has in fact played into the private sector as well. Several universities have implemented hiring freezes and layoffs based on concerns that they'll lose federal funding. Johns Hopkins laid off 2,200 workers after losing USAID funding. Federal funds have been withdrawn from colleges who don't align with certain policies of the current administrations. And it's not just the liberal educators freaking out. Wall Street is almost as scared as Main Street right now. Mergers and acquisitions have slowed, the same with IPOs. Banks like Goldman Sachs and B of A have already started cost-cutting measures and layoffs. Now, before you close this video due to your political affiliation, let me get to my point. Dodge's first initiative may not have been government efficiency. It might have been shock the American economy enough to get people to stop spending money they don't have. Other Americans watching this pandemonium might also get a bit more nervous, a bit more conservative in their spending patterns. Here's how tariffs could actually be anti-inflationary. The S&P has declined more than 9% over the past 10 days due to fears about these tariffs and a trade war. That has a major impact on the wealth effect of Americans. Now remember, the wealth effect is not how much money they actually have, it's how good they feel about spending money. Will we see inflation numbers come down because even if they haven't lost their own job yet or their own retirement savings, they're watching the news and getting nervous? Entering stage left, a Trump session. Last Sunday, Trump shared on Fox News that we shouldn't rule out a recession. It could be possible. It's in the realm of possibility. By all measures of a healthy economy, Trump inherited a strong one. Whether from himself 4 years prior, whether from President Biden, or whether from the Lord above. That is not the point of today's post. The question is, how likely are we to see a recession based on the recent tumble in the stock market, or was the economy strong enough to withstand this blip? We have near full employment, as I mentioned. GDP continues to outperform economists' expectations, and even the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, God, why can't I ever say that right? Says the likelihood of a 2025 recession is slim. On the other hand, JP Morgan puts the recession odds at 40%, blaming extreme US policies. Moody's chief economist, Mark Zandi, said this week that the risk of an economic downturn was uncomfortably high and rising. While this is all likely to impact the Fed's stance on rates, it's also influencing investor behavior and the demand for bonds, which is why mortgage interest rates are coming down. So what should you do? Specific to real estate, now is the time to prepare for opportunities. Your buying power is about to increase. Will your competition also stiffen up? That has been what every Instagram realtor has been telling you for over a year. When interest rates come down, there's going to be a flood of buyers back into the market and you will have to pay more for a house. I have an alternative scenario that maybe we could all consider this weekend. What if other buyers are too freaked out to jump back in? I haven't seen this yet. Full disclaimer, activity has been really high since mid-January. We're taking more applications, we have more borrowers actively shopping, and we're closing more loans. But I have a feeling that if people were freezing before the election and taking a wait and see approach, they might do the same thing with the looming recession fears. Yes, millionaires are made in recessions, but only those who are brave enough to take action. Which means this spring and summer buying season could be the biggest opportunity zone for buyers who are serious enough and investors who are brave enough.